Anna, first of all, would you tell some words about yourself and about your background?
Yes, so my name is Anna Romberg and I am a anti-corruption and compliance advisor, and I have during the last 10 or 15 years been working with multinational companies, in particular with anti-corruption matters, and also helping to put in place compliance structures. And originally I come from Finland, but work really on a global scale with international companies. So that's a little bit, anything else you want to know?
Yes, great, thank you so much. And the first question is, what happens within global companies when they implement whistleblowing program?
So my experience from working with many different companies and also talking to compliance colleagues is that you actually get an increase in reports. So it's a myth to think that, okay, a company doesn't have any whistleblowing cases, that they don't have any issues, because global companies usually have issues. So, and an increase in cases, that's what you should expect, and it's actually not a bad thing. It can be, of course, for, let's say, you work with a global company and you convince them of that, let's invest in implementing a whistleblowing hotline and a compliance program, and you train employees, and suddenly you go back to the board and you have a triple amount of cases. And from their perspective, it may seem like a bad thing, that okay, do we have more issues now? But that's actually not the thing. Usually it's historical issues that now are detected and people feel comfortable about speaking up. And having cases is a good thing because it tells you about your culture, that you're a transparent company, that people feel comfortable of raising issues. So I think cases are good, and more cases, that's also a good thing, a good sign of that the company culture is improving.
As for human rights abuses, would you provide some examples, some cases of human rights abuses in global companies?
The human rights, it's a hot topic at the moment. I think it's excellent that it's come on the agenda, and it can look. Anything that infringes on the rights as me as a human, it's a human rights violation, and so it can be freedom of speech, for example. A practical example that I have is from my times at Telia, when the company was alleged of collaborating with oppressive regimes, providing them with telecommunications data. So there, Telia had to implement a robust freedom of expression policy and corresponding process to mitigate that risk. But I think that's one thing. Okay, so violations of freedom of expression and surveillance of citizens through telecommunications networks, it's one. And then secondly, when it comes to human rights, if there's been studies that's been done on what are the biggest human rights issues, and I think the two top ones, it's poverty, so people are poor, and secondly it's corruption, that people live in corrupt societies that doesn't provide them, good education. It's you have to pay to get into schools, you have to pay to get good to hospitals, you have to pay to the police. So to live in a society that's corrupt, it's also violating human rights.
Each company, each global company is involved in corruption. Why do you think so?
Maybe it's a bit to generalize to say that each global company is involved in corruption, but I think there are compliance issues definitely in global companies because of the nature of human beings. People are opportunistic, people are greedy, we are greedy as human beings, we are selfish, and if there is an opportunity and for example, if you have the opportunity, the company has poor controls, it's very easy for you to manipulate that. Or so I wouldn't say that it's because companies are bad companies, but it's just that we are humans, and humans doesn't always act in the best possible way, and that we see in our societies, and we see it all in all places. We see it even in the small sort of micro cells as families. In families we don't act in the best way possible all the time either, so why should we be model citizens when we are at work? So I think that's why companies need code of conducts. That's why we need to work with ethics and to create an awareness of that. Okay, hey, you need to behave also at work.
And of course we have saint people, and presumption of innocence, yes. But the goal of corporation activities is money, yes. That's the reason why they could be corrupted.
Yeah, greed as well, and also what I have one example that's pretty telling is when you think of a person that works in a corrupt country, first of all, where there is no social network. You don't have any institution that protects you, and you are the sole provider for your family. And your family, it's your parents, your wife parents, your 10 kids, and your nephew, and your aunt and uncle. So, I mean, that's not an untypical society scenario in a developing society. So, and then think you are the sales manager of a global corporation, and you have this huge burden of providing for your whole family in this very unpredictable society. And there is a huge deal at stake. And you know that, okay, by getting that deal, your bonuses will be rocket high, and that will be, so what's the right thing to do? The right thing for your family to actually get your bonus, and then what you would have to do is you don't pay huge bribes, but you take the persons at the customers to expensive dinners, you take them out to give them maybe some iPads, facilitate a little bit is to get the deal. And for that local person, it may be a no-brainer. Think, of course, I will take these people to a little bit more expensive restaurants and give them some personal iPads because I'll get the deal and my family is provided for. So, so we have to understand those complexities as well. And then if I sit at the head office, here in Tallinn or in Helsinki or in Stockholm, and I say, you do the right thing, and just assume that people automatically will behave in a way that we think is right, I think that's a bit naive. So we need to understand that in global corporations there are different circumstances, context, people are individuals, they have other loyalties as well. So yeah, it's...
But chocolate is not a bribe, yes?
No, I got a box of chocolate and it was only chocolate and no money hidden into it. So I would say
and
that's fine.
As for even if a country has an institutions, it could be corrupted because it could be just image, yes, that they have 3 branches of power and etc. But the whole, all of them are mafia, one mafia, yeah? Yeah.
The fact is that I think more or less every country in the world has signed the UN Convention Against Corruption. I don't know how many signatories, you can Google that, but I used to say it in the companies I worked with, virtually every country that we are active in, they have, they've signed the UN Convention Against Corruption. There is a corruption legislation in that very corrupt country. So it's not that they won't have the legislation, it's not that they on the paper don't have the institutions. It's so I think there also it's very treacherous to just rely on what's the formal institutions, but really to understand the complexity of the informal institutions in that country. And that was an interesting exercise we actually did at Telia when we did the risk assessments. when we started, revamping the anti-corruption program, we did these anti-corruption risk assessments, and we did country risk assessments where we actually looked at the institutions, we looked at the hidden powers, we looked at who is who, and you see that some countries are run like businesses. It's not independent countries, it's
Absolutely.
like a business. So, and you need to understand that as a company, if you should operate in that context, you have to understand who is who and how that society works in reality.
A lot of people afraid to speak up, and they are suppressed by a company. Yes, and they even accept the bad work conditions, bad work environment, and they are like slaves when they accept bad working conditions. So, should we expect from such people any activities to protect their own rights? And they are so manipulated by a company, and so that request from them to be loyal, yes, and brainwash them. So, how can you comment such a phenomenon, maybe, that corporate culture and brainwashing?
Yeah, I think if we go back to the example I gave, so let's take this sales manager in this highly corrupt or challenging country that's providing for his whole extended family. Would he speak up? I guess that's one scenario. Or the other scenario is where you are an employee in a very, if you speak up, you can be 100% certain that you will be laid off, or it's very difficult. So I think it's very important to understand that we require a lot from our employees or our colleagues when we say speak up. And not to diminish that, not to just, again, as I said, you sit in head office and you say, okay, do the right thing, you don't bribe, speak up. I mean, we can't just say those kind of things without really understanding the individuals. And as I mentioned during my presentation, that requires you to get a little bit uncomfortable and travel and meet with people and see those situations and really understand how things are in reality. I don't think we'll get any change if we understand how things are on a grassroots level.
Yes, absolutely. But it's sad to say that workers accept misconducts of companies.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's horrible. Why should? But then you come to the whole psychology of speaking up and retaliation, and people just, and also I think it comes from a bit related example. It's not really about accepting misconduct, but it's about understanding the culture. I was in a former Soviet Union country, quite far east, and had a presentation or training on corruption and conflict of interest. And after that training, the people there in the management team, they said, yeah, good training and thank you. But you know what? I mean, what's the issue with conflict of interest? Why is that a bad thing? Because isn't it the best thing that I recruit my nephew or my cousin or my brother? I use my brother's construction company because I can trust him. And that's how they have survived, back in the Soviet Union times. I mean, you had connections, you knew people, you had your loyalties in the right places. I mean, of course, that's how you act in the business world. Why should you employ somebody that you don't know? Why should you employ totally a company based on a tender process and it's totally random who will get the job. No, of course you give it to your cousin, because if there's something wrong, you can always call your cousin and say, hey, now you behave. So they're just to understand that people are accepting things because they think it's normal. And then we have to, have a discussion and say what's really normal. And it's a bit the same if people accept, bad working conditions because they think it's normal. We have to reach out and be on the ground and say, no, this is not normal, this is abnormal. And if you see this, you need to speak up. But we have to be very practical and concrete.
Yes. You told that you have know a lot of reports from the Baltic states because people are silent. Yes?
Yeah, and it's not scientific in a sense but when having worked with companies that have implemented whistleblowing hotlines in the Baltic states, it seems that people are very reluctant to that kind of a process. It brings bad connotations, and you don't prefer, you mind your own business, and you don't prefer to talk about others' business. So that's my experience. And again, there we come back to the local culture and context, and you have to understand that. Yes. When you implement these kind of things.
And they prefer to be victimized, to have small salary, maybe, and bad working conditions, but.
Maybe that's, or maybe it's just because you don't speak up. You don't know that something is wrong. Maybe, as well as I said, you think it's normal. And
you told that companies should create a mini crisis within companies. For what? What do you mean?
That's my response to a question that I get very often, because I worked at a company, worked at Telia when they had a huge scandal, and I was responsible for the anti-bribery corruption program there during 3 years. And then I usually get the question after a presentation. They say, okay, but it's of course in a company like Telia, of course it's easy to get resources to implement a very best-in-class compliance program because you had the crisis. But what in a company that doesn't have the crisis? And that's when I give the answer and say, well, you have to create your own mini crisis. And with that I mean, as we were starting our discussion with, that there are issues in any global company. I mean, there are ethical issues, compliance issues, breaches of code of conduct, or this kind of misalignment on what's right or wrong. So you need to understand that. You go to the countries, talk with people, understand what kind of situations they are in, and present that to management. So that's the reality of our company. How does this look like? And sort of, play with the idea that what if this would be out in the media? Is this the picture we want to give of our company? So that's what I mean with a mini crisis, that you look at your company, you look at your risks, and then you create a hypothetical scenario and say, okay, what if this would be our crisis? How would it look like? Would you be proud of the company in this case?
Whistleblowing has a bad connotation. Why? And how can you change this attitude?
I think I mentioned that in one company we rebranded the whistleblowing hotline to Speak Up. Other companies have helpline and so on, because it's whistleblowing sounds bad. And I think it's unfortunately due to that people who have blown the whistle have been treated badly, and it's they've lost their jobs, or they're excluded from the group. They are not perceived as sort of the nice guy or gal. I mean, who wants to hang out with somebody who is snitching? So I think it comes from that. It's people don't like when somebody is sort of talking about your things to another body and so on. So it's we're a group. I think if humans are sort of group, we love group things and a sense of belonging, and we all agree, and it's sort of nice and cozy and so on. And then somebody sticks out and blows the whistle. So yeah, so as I already was saying, when you implement whistleblowing hotline, you should have an increase in cases, and there you need to convince people that cases are good. It's a good sign that people speak up about things that are not in line with our values. That's a good thing, because we want to be a transparent company. But you have to keep repeating that message that reports are good, and I think that's the only way that we create actually a good environment around bringing out our misconduct. But it's a long process, because today it's think about it yourself. Would you be a whistleblower?
Yes, but majority is brainwashed and they are loyal, but one behave in another way, so they can accept.
I like these group things. Somebody's sticking out and it's uncomfortable.
You told that 80% of reports are substantial and 20% trash.
Yeah, and that was in the in the beginning for one company, visualizing that usually management has a fear when you implement these kind of whistleblowing hotlines, that there will be a lot of rubbish coming in. So you will have 80% rubbish and only 20% real reports, and it's a bit of a reluctance. Why should we allow for people to report these things anonymously and so on? But my experience is that the contrary, that actually a majority of the reports are substantiated. So it's not a valid fear. People do not use these systems lightly. That's how I see it and how I've experienced it.
Can you provide some maybe common trash reports?
Well, I usually say like my boss is an idiot type of report, but people can one case can be that people complain about total rubbish, like my boss is an idiot, or the food in the canteen is bad. I mean, those reports doesn't come in, but some maybe fear that these reports will come in. Other reports may not be rubbish, but they may not be substantiated either. And those cases you need to investigate. One example can be that somebody who hasn't been involved in a procurement process thinks that there is conflict of interest between a technical manager and a supplier, because one particular supplier was chosen. And then perhaps the person hears that the technical manager's cousin is working at the supplier. So he files a report and says, okay, there's conflict of interest here. Probably the technical manager receives kickbacks because his cousin is working there. So it may sound valid, but the person who's filed the report doesn't maybe have complete facts. But it's still good that they filed the report. So I think if you have concerns like that, file a report. But then when you investigate it, you may, for example, see that the person's cousin is actually working in finance in that other company, or maybe in marketing. There was a transparent procurement process. The technical manager didn't actually decide on that, but it was somebody else. So the prices are competitive. So you can see that actually it's not an issue, but it may look like one. So you have like rubbish, or you have non-substantiated, or then you have things that are actually sort of substantiated.
But if a boss is an idiot, it's a big problem for employees, for a company.
Yeah, and I usually actually say as well that it was mentioned during a seminar earlier today that you should have a broad net, so you should actually try to capture everything. And I agree, because if you get 10 reports on that this particular manager is behaving very poorly, it's a huge issue. You need to ask HR, what are you doing about this? So it can be, of course, a real issue that as well. So that's why I say, like, in quotes, these kind of reports, but it's
kind of corruption. But maybe human or mental or what kind of corruption?
Yeah. Or unethical or bad management
Unethical.
behavior. Yeah.
Yes, bad management behavior.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it's a serious problem as well.
Yeah, bad management behavior, distorting facts, being non-transparent,
Ignore people.
or
and,
lie about
violate,
things.
Yes.
To present a prettier picture, a project is going terrible, but you're still telling management that, no, but it's okay, we're going to fix it. I mean, there are a lot of those kind of issues that has to do with honesty and transparency, and all of that impacts the culture in a company.
So should employees go to a court to protect their rights if some laws violated because of misconducts and bad management behavior?
I'm not sure if I fully understand your question, but I think if you see...
To apply to court.
Yeah, so if you see bad management behavior, first of all, I mean, there is organizations in place. You have...
If it affects you.
Yeah, exactly. So then you should go to HR, right, and raise it with HR. HR doesn't react, okay, you can go to the manager's manager and say, okay, they don't react, you go to compliance, you file a report. Compliance doesn't do anything about it, totally ignores that. Then, of course, I mean, that's what we were saying today, that unfortunately many scandals originate from disgruntled employees that the company hasn't taken seriously. So it's how it should go is that the company should obviously react to, that the manager is not behaving in the right way and should look into it and have corrective actions. I see that sort of as normal operational management, that you have corrective action plans and you have evaluations and you have performance reviews and so on. And then compliance is sort of a last resort. But if everything fails, then of course some employees may feel forced to go external. But I would say, I mean, the first resort is to try to resolve it the internal way always.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anna, for this great interview, and wish you all the best and great success in your work.
Thank you so much.